You're one of the most legendary rock stars to ever walk the planet. You've spent over 6 decades performing to millions, accumulating a fortune that most people couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. Your bank accounts are overflowing with hundreds of millions of dollars. Your real estate portfolio spans continents. Your music catalog is worth more than some small country's GDP. And then you look at your 8 children, ranging from their early 20s to their 50s, and you make a decision that shocks the world. You tell them they're not getting the money. At least, not most of it. That's exactly what Mick Jagger did. And when his family found out, the tears started flowing. But here's the twist. Those weren't necessarily tears of sadness or anger. They were tears that told a much more complex, fascinating, and deeply human story about wealth, family, legacy, and what it really means to leave something behind. Mick Jagger isn't just rich. He's stratospherically wealthy. We're talking about a net worth that hovers around $600 million, depending on which financial report you believe. Some estimates place it at $500 million. Others push it closer to $600 million. And the truth probably lies somewhere in that range. But let's be honest. When you're dealing with numbers that big, what's $100 million between friends? To put this in perspective, if Mick Jagger decided to spend $10,000 every single day for the rest of his life, starting right now, he'd still have trouble making a dent in his fortune before he reached 100 years old. That's the kind of wealth we're discussing. It's the kind of money that doesn't just change lives. It creates dynasties. It builds empires. It ensures that your great-great-great-grandchildren will never have to work a day in their lives if they choose not to. But where did all this money come from? Sure, we all know Mick Jagger as a prancing, pouting, impossibly energetic frontman of the Rolling Stones, one of the greatest rock bands in history. But being a rock star isn't quite the cash cow it used to be, even for someone at Jagger's level. The music industry has changed dramatically. Streaming pays fractions of pennies per play. Album sales are practically extinct. So how does someone like Mick Jagger maintain and even grow a fortune in the hundreds of millions? The answer is more fascinating than you might think, and it reveals a business acumen that rivals his musical talent. Mick Jagger isn't just a performer. He's a businessman, an investor, a brand manager, and a savvy financial strategist who understood decades ago that the real money in music doesn't come from record sales alone. Let's start with the obvious. Touring. The Rolling Stones are one of the highest-grossing touring acts in the history of music. When the Stones go on tour, they don't just play concerts. They create events. They fill stadiums and arenas with 60, 70, even 80,000 people at a time. And those people aren't paying $20 for a ticket. No, they're shelling out hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for the privilege of seeing living legends perform. In 2018 alone, the Rolling Stones earned a staggering $117 million from just 14 shows. Let that sink in. 14 shows. $117 million. That's over $8 million per show. And that's just the ticket revenue. Add in merchandise sales, sponsorship deals, and all the other revenue streams that come with a major tour, and you start to understand the scale of the money involved. Over the course of their career, the Rolling Stones have grossed well over $2 billion from touring. Mick Jagger, as the frontman and one of the primary songwriters, takes a significant cut of that pie. But touring is just the beginning. The real wealth, the generational wealth, comes from music publishing and songwriting royalties. This is where Mick Jagger made the smartest financial decision of his career. Along with Keith Richards, Jagger wrote or co-wrote the vast majority of the Rolling Stones catalog. Every time one of their songs plays on the radio, streams on Spotify, gets used in a movie, appears in a commercial, or plays in a retail store, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards get paid. And the Rolling Stones have hundreds of songs. Classics like Satisfaction, Paint It Black, Sympathy for the Devil, Gimme Shelter, Start Me Up Brown Sugar, Angie, Wild Horses, the list goes on and on. These aren't just songs. They're cultural touchstones that have been played billions of times across multiple generations. The publishing rights to this catalog are worth an estimated $500 million on their own. That's separate from everything else. Just the songs. Just the intellectual property of the music they created. Jagger himself has acknowledged that music publishing is where the real money is. In interviews, He's stated that publishing has been more profitable to the artist than recording. It's just tradition, he said. There's no rhyme or reason. The people who wrote songs were probably better business people than the people who sang them. But in Jagger's case, he's both the writer and the singer, which means he's collecting on both ends. Unlike many artists who sold their publishing rights early in their careers for quick cash, Jagger and Richards held on to theirs. They understood the long-term value of owning their work, and that decision has paid off exponentially. Every time a TV show uses Paint It Black in a scene, every time a movie features Gimme Shelter, every time an advertisement wants that classic rock credibility, they come to the Rolling Stones with checkbooks open. And Mick Jagger's share of those checks adds up to millions upon millions of dollars every single year, even when he's not actively touring or recording. Then there's real estate. Mick Jagger's property portfolio reads like a travel guide for the ultra-wealthy. He owns or has owned properties in some of the most expensive and exclusive locations on Earth. In London, he owned a legendary party house in Marylebone where the Stones held court during the swinging 60s. That property alone was recently listed for $7 million. He owned a sprawling estate in Lakewood Ranch, Florida, a 5,700-square-foot luxury home that he sold for $3.25 million in 2023. In France, he purchased Chateau La Fourchette, an actual castle in the Loire Valley, for 2.2 million French francs back in 1980. That property has appreciated enormously in value over the decades. He's owned homes in Mustique, a private Caribbean island where property values start in the millions and go up from there. He's maintained residences in New York City, including apartments worth multiple millions of dollars. And these aren't just investments sitting empty. Many of these properties have been rented out, generating passive income on top of their appreciation in value. But Jagger's financial savvy goes beyond real estate and music. He's been involved in film production, both as an actor and as a producer. He founded Jagged Films, a production company that's been involved in multiple projects over the years. He's made shrewd investments in various business ventures, though he keeps most of these private. He's been careful with his tax planning, legally structuring his finances to minimize his tax burden, which is how someone with his income level manages to pay a surprisingly low percentage in taxes compared to their earnings. It's not illegal. It's smart financial planning with expensive advisors and careful structuring of assets and income streams. All of this adds up to a fortune that most people can barely comprehend. $600 million. $600 million that could ensure comfort and luxury for generations of Jaggers to come. And yet, in a 2023 interview with the Wall Street Journal that sent shockwaves through the entertainment world, Mick Jagger casually suggested that his 8 children might not inherit most of it. The children don't need $500 million to live well, he said. Come on. He went on to suggest that much of his fortune might go to charity instead. You maybe do some good in the world, he added. Now, to understand why this statement caused such a stir and why it might have made his family cry, we need to understand who those 8 children are. Mick Jagger's family is as complicated and sprawling as his fortune is large. He has 8 children with 5 different women, spanning an age range of 46 years. Let that number sink in. 46 years. His oldest child, Karis, is 53 years old. His youngest, Deveraux, is only 8. Mick Jagger became a father at the same age when most people become grandfathers, and then he kept going. He has 5 grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild, making him a great-grandfather who still tours and performs at 81 years old. Let's meet the Jagger children, because each of them has their own story, their own relationship with their famous father, and their own reaction to the news that the family fortune might not be coming their way. First, there's Karis Hunt Jagger, born in November 1970. She's the oldest, the firstborn, and her story is perhaps the most complicated and emotionally fraught of all the Jagger children. Karis's mother is Marcia Hunt, an American actress and singer who had a brief but intense relationship with Mick Jagger in the late 60s. When Marcia became pregnant, Mick initially denied paternity. He refused to acknowledge Karis as his daughter and provided no financial support. Marcia Hunt had to take him to court in a paternity suit, and only after a legal battle did Mick Jagger acknowledge Karis and begin providing for her. You can imagine the emotional scars that left on both mother and daughter. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Despite that painful beginning, Mick Jagger eventually developed a relationship with Karis. She became close to him as she grew older. She's been present at family events, she's traveled with him, and she's even worked as a production assistant on film projects. When Mick Jagger's longtime partner, fashion designer Ren Scott, tragically committed suicide in 2014, it was Karis who was by Jagger's side, helping him through one of the darkest periods of his life. Today, Karis is a successful woman in her own right. She's educated, accomplished, and has maintained a relationship with her father despite the difficult start. She's also a mother herself, making Mick a grandfather through her children. Then there's Jade Sheena Jezebel Jagger, born in October 1971. Jade is Mick's only child with Bianca Jagger, the Nicaraguan actress and human rights advocate who was married to Mick from 1971 to 1978. Bianca was Mick's first wife, and their wedding in St. Tropez was one of the social events of the early 70s. Jade grew up in the absolute epicenter of rock and roll royalty. She was a child of divorce, but one who had access to both of her famous parents' worlds. Jade became a jewelry designer and has built a successful career creating pieces for major fashion houses and her own line. She's maintained strong relationships with both her parents and has had 3 children of her own, adding to the Jagger grandchild count. Next up is Elizabeth Scarlett Jagger, born in March 1984. Lizzie, as she's known, is Mick's first child with Jerry Hall, the Texas-born supermodel who was Mick's partner for over 2 decades. Jerry and Mick had a Hindu wedding ceremony in Bali in 1990, though it was later ruled not to be legally binding when they separated in 1999. Lizzie followed her mother into modeling and has been quite successful, walking runways for major designers and appearing in high-profile campaigns. She's gorgeous, charismatic, and has used her famous last name to open doors while also working hard to establish her own identity. She's also dabbled in acting and has maintained a relatively private personal life, despite growing up in the absolute glare of the tabloid spotlight. James Leroy Augustine Jagger came next, born in August 1985. James is Mick and Jerry's second child and first son. Unlike some of his siblings, James went into acting and has built a legitimate career in film and television. He's appeared in HBO's Vinyl, a series about the music industry in the 70s that his father executive produced. He's been in movies and independent films, working to establish himself as a serious actor rather than just trading on his famous name. James has spoken in interviews about the pressure of being a Jagger, about wanting to be known for his own work rather than his father's legacy. He's thoughtful, articulate, and seems to have inherited some of his father's creative drive, if not his specific musical talent. Georgia May Aisha Jagger, born in January 1992, is another child who followed her mother Jerry Hall into modeling, and Georgia has been phenomenally successful at it. She's been the face of major fashion campaigns, she's walked in fashion weeks around the world, and she's graced the covers of countless magazines. Georgia has the cheekbones, the pout, and a rock and roll pedigree that makes her irresistible to fashion photographers. She's also been open about her struggles with anxiety and her efforts to maintain authenticity in an industry that often prizes image over substance. Georgia is close with her siblings and has spoken fondly of her father despite his complicated personal life and the chaos of growing up Jagger. Then there's Gabriel Luke Beauregard Jagger, born in December 1997. Gabriel is the youngest of Mick's children with Jerry Hall, and he's been somewhat quieter than his siblings in terms of public profile. He's dabbled in modeling, he's studied business and economics, and he seems to be charting a course that's less about the spotlight and more about understanding how to manage wealth and business. Gabriel represents a new generation of celebrity children who are more conscious about social media, about privacy, and about building sustainable careers rather than just capitalizing on fame. Lucas Maurice Moura Jagger, born in May 1999, is Mick's son with Brazilian television personality Luciana Jimenez. Lucas's birth was a result of an affair that effectively ended Mick's relationship with Jerry Hall. The paternity was contested initially, but DNA testing confirmed Mick was a father, and he settled with Luciana for a reported $5 million plus ongoing child support of $25,000 per month, plus a Manhattan apartment worth as much as $2 million. Lucas grew up primarily in Brazil with his mother and has had a more distant relationship with his father compared to some of the other children. He's now in his mid-20s, He's pursued modeling, and he's maintained a relatively low profile compared to his half-siblings. Finally, there's Deveraux Octavian Basil Jagger, born in December 2016. Deveraux is Mick's youngest child, born when Mick was 73 years old. His mother is Melanie Hamrick, an American ballet dancer who is 45 years younger than Mick. Deveraux is still a young child, growing up in a world completely different from the one his oldest sister Karis knew. While Karis grew up in the aftermath of the 60s counterculture with a father who was still establishing his legend, Deveraux is growing up with a father who is an icon, a knight of the British Empire, and one of the most recognizable people on the planet. The age gap between Deveraux and his oldest sister is 46 years. They're from different generations, different worlds, different eras of their father's life. So when Mick Jagger announced that his children don't need $500 million to live well, and suggested he might give much of his fortune to charity, imagine the reaction in this sprawling, complicated family. 8 children, 5 mothers, decades of different relationships and levels of closeness with their father, all suddenly confronting the reality that the massive fortune they might have expected to inherit could instead go to charitable causes. The tears that reportedly followed weren't simple. They were layered with complex emotions: surprise, disappointment, pride, understanding, resentment, and perhaps even relief. For some of the children, particularly the older ones like Karis and Jade, who've had more time to establish their own careers and identities separate from their father, the announcement might have brought tears of pride. Here was their father, at 80 years old, making a statement about values over wealth, about contribution over accumulation. He was essentially saying that he'd raised them well enough that they didn't need his money to succeed. That's a compliment wrapped in a financial decision. It's an affirmation that they're capable, talented, and successful in their own right. For children who sometimes struggle to step out of their famous father's shadow, to be known for something other than being Mick Jagger's kid, this announcement could actually be liberating. It removes the expectation of inherited wealth and forces a conversation to be about who they are and what they've accomplished rather than what they'll inherit. For other children, particularly the younger ones like Lucas and Deveraux, who haven't had as much time to establish independent wealth and careers, the tears might have been more complicated. Lucas, who grew up somewhat separated from his father and his half-siblings, might have seen inheritance as a connection, as a tangible representation of his place in the Jagger family. To have that potentially taken away could feel like another rejection, another reminder that he was born from an affair rather than a committed relationship. And for Deveraux, who at 8 years old couldn't possibly understand the financial implications, his mother Melanie might have shed tears thinking about his future. Melanie is 45 years younger than Mick. Basic actuarial tables suggest that Mick will likely pass away when Deveraux is still relatively young, possibly even a teenager. Without a massive inheritance, what does that mean for Deveraux's future? But here's what makes Mick Jagger's decision even more interesting. He didn't say he was cutting his children off entirely. He didn't say they'd get nothing. He said they don't need $500 million. And he's right, because here's a little secret that most people don't know about the Jagger children. Many of them are already quite wealthy in their own right. Georgia May Jagger's modeling career has earned her an estimated net worth in the range of several $millions. Elizabeth Jagger is similarly successful. Jade Jagger's jewelry design business has made her wealthy independently of her father. James Jagger's acting career, while perhaps not blockbuster level, has been steady and professional. These aren't trust fund kids sitting around waiting for daddy to die. They're accomplished professionals who built their own careers, even if their famous last name opened some doors. And let's talk about the other side of this equation, the mothers. 5 different women have had children with Mick Jagger, and their situations vary wildly. Marcia Hunt, Karis's mother, struggled financially for years and had to fight Mick in court just to get child support. Bianca Jagger, Jade's mother, received a settlement when she and Mick divorced, but it was reportedly far less than she wanted, around $15.5 million from an estate valued at over $250 million at the time. Jerry Hall, mother to 4 of the Jagger children, also received a settlement when she and Mick separated, though the exact amount has never been publicly confirmed. Estimates suggest it was in the neighborhood of $15 to $25 million. Luciana Jimenez received her settlement of $5 million plus ongoing child support and the Manhattan apartment. And Melanie Hamrick, mother of the youngest Jagger child, is still with Mick. So her situation is different entirely. The point is that these mothers, particularly those who are no longer with Mick, might have been counting on their children receiving substantial inheritances that would benefit not just the kids, but potentially grandchildren and even the mothers themselves. When Mick announced his intention to potentially give most of his fortune to charity, it affected not just 8 children, but an entire ecosystem of extended family members, their children, and their financial planning. But let's zoom out for a moment and ask a bigger question. Is Mick Jagger making the right decision? Should extremely wealthy people leave their fortunes to their children, or should they give away to charity? This is one of the great philosophical debates of our time, particularly in an era of increasing wealth inequality. On one hand, you have the argument that parents work hard to provide for their families, and passing wealth to the next generation is a natural expression of love and care. It ensures that your children and grandchildren have opportunities, security, and the freedom to pursue their passions without the constant pressure of financial survival. When you build an empire, why wouldn't you want your bloodline to benefit from it? On the other hand, you have the argument that Mick Jagger is making, that massive inherited wealth can actually be harmful. It can destroy motivation, create entitlement, and prevent people from developing the resilience and work ethic that comes from having to earn your own way. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, has famously said that he believes in leaving his children enough money so they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. Bill Gates has made similar statements, pledging to give away the vast majority of his fortune to charity rather than leaving it all to his children. The idea is that truly massive wealth should be used to address major problems in the world: poverty, disease, education, climate change, rather than creating dynasties of inherited privilege. There's also a practical consideration that Mick Jagger hinted at: the changing nature of wealth in the music industry. Mick has acknowledged that the era of massive music industry payouts may be over. Streaming has decimated per-unit revenues. The model that made Jagger and his contemporaries fabulously wealthy simply doesn't exist anymore for new artists. By not leaving his entire fortune to his children, Jagger might be teaching them a crucial lesson. Wealth is not permanent. Industries change, and the only sustainable path forward is adaptability and self-sufficiency. And then there's the charity question. What good could $500 million do in the world? The answer is an enormous amount. $500 million could fund thousands of scholarships, build hospitals, support medical research, provide clean water to millions of people in developing nations, protect endangered species and habitats, support arts education for underprivileged youth, and so much more. If Mick Jagger directs even a portion of his fortune to well-chosen charitable causes, the impact could be profound and lasting. His name could become associated not just with rock and roll, but with genuine positive change in the world. That's a legacy that potentially means more than another wealthy family dynasty. But here's where things get really interesting. Mick Jagger didn't actually say he was definitely giving all his money to charity. What he said was more nuanced. He said his children don't need $500 million, which is true. He said maybe the money would go to charity one day, to do some good in the world. That's not a firm commitment. That's a possibility, a suggestion, a philosophical musing. And this is where Mick Jagger reveals himself to be not just a rock star, but a master psychologist, and perhaps a bit of a manipulator, in the best sense of the word. By publicly stating that his children might not inherit his fortune, Jagger accomplishes several things simultaneously. First, he takes pressure off his children. They're no longer those rich kids waiting for their inheritance. They're individuals who need to make their own way in the world. Second, he protects them from fortune hunters, from people who might try to befriend or marry them primarily for access to the Jagger wealth. Third, he maintains control. As long as the money is his and the inheritance is uncertain, he maintains leverage and influence over his family dynamics. It's not necessarily cynical. It's realistic. Money changes relationships, and by keeping the question of inheritance open and uncertain, Jagger keeps those relationships more authentic. Fourth, he makes a public statement about his values. In an era where billionaires and multimillionaires are often criticized for hoarding wealth, Jagger positions himself as someone who understands that money should serve a purpose beyond just accumulation. And here's the thing that many people miss. Mick Jagger can change his mind. He can leave his children whatever he wants in his will. He can set up trusts, create foundations, structure his estate in any number of creative ways that provide for his family, while also supporting charitable causes. The announcement that he might give most of his money to charity doesn't legally bind him to do so. It's a statement of philosophy, not necessarily a statement of definitive action. There's also the question of what not inheriting the fortune actually means in practical terms. Even if Mick Jagger left only 10% of his estate to be divided among his 8 children, that would still be somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 million, or $7.5 million per child. That's not exactly poverty. That's still generational wealth. That's still enough to buy homes, fund educations, invest for the future, and live very comfortably. So when Jagger says his children don't need $500 million to live well, he's absolutely correct. They could live extremely well on a fraction of that amount. Let's also consider what Mick Jagger has likely already done for his children financially. Over the course of their lives, he's almost certainly provided substantial support. He's paid for elite educations. He's made connections that open professional doors. He's provided financial help for home purchases, business ventures, and various life expenses. Some of his children have worked directly in family businesses or on projects that their father financed or supported. In essence, they've already received significant financial benefits from being Mick Jagger's children, even if they don't inherit the bulk of his estate. There's another fascinating wrinkle to this story that comes from Mick Jagger's own experience with inheritance. In 2014, when Jagger's longtime partner Ren Scott committed suicide, she left her entire $9 million estate to Mick Jagger. Her will specified that everything, her $8 million Manhattan apartment, her clothing and jewelry, her personal effects, should go to Mick. She left nothing to her own family, nothing to siblings or other relatives. This decision caused some controversy, as Scott's family felt hurt and rejected by the decision, but it also may have shaped Jagger's thinking about inheritance and family. He saw firsthand how it can cause pain, how the distribution of wealth can create family rifts, and how sometimes the people you love might not need your money as much as they need other things from you. The tears that Mick Jagger's announcement brought to his family were probably cathartic in many ways. They forced conversations that wealthy families often avoid. They brought to the surface questions about values, about what really matters, about what we owe our children, and what they should expect from us. In many families, these conversations never happen until someone dies, and then they happen in the context of grief and conflict, often mediated by lawyers. By raising these questions while he's still alive and active, Mick Jagger has given his family the opportunity to process, discuss, and come to terms with the reality of the situation while he's still here to explain his reasoning and his love for them. There's also something to be said for the fact that Mick Jagger, at 81, is still touring, still performing, and still earning money. The Rolling Stones' most recent tour was enormously successful, grossing hundreds of millions of dollars. As long as Jagger is alive and working, the size of his fortune continues to grow. The Stones' catalog continues to generate revenue. His real estate continues to appreciate. His investments continue to pay dividends. By the time he actually passes away, his estate could be significantly larger than the current estimated $500 or $600 million. And his thinking about how to distribute it may have evolved as well. One of the most interesting aspects of wealth at Jagger's level is how it becomes almost abstract. 500 million, 600 million, 700 million. At a certain point, the numbers stop meaning anything in terms of practical lifestyle. You can only live in one house at a time. You can only eat so many meals. You can only wear one outfit. The difference between having 100 million and having 600 million isn't really about quality of life. It's about power, influence, legacy, and what you can make happen in the world. For someone like Mick Jagger, who has lived one of the most extraordinary lives imaginable, who has experienced every luxury and excess, perhaps the only thing left that matters is what kind of mark you leave on a world beyond your music. Let's consider some of the potential charities and causes that might benefit from the Jagger fortune. Given his background and interests, music education seems like a natural fit. Jagger could endow music programs in schools, provide instruments and instruction to underprivileged children, or support music therapy programs for people dealing with trauma or illness. He could support cancer research, having lost friends and colleagues to the disease over the years. He could support environmental causes, particularly those related to climate change and conservation. He could support arts organizations, theaters, museums, and cultural institutions. He could create scholarship programs for students from working-class backgrounds, similar to his own origins. The possibilities are virtually endless, and the impact could be enormous. But there's another possibility that's worth considering. Maybe the announcement itself was the point. Maybe Mick Jagger never intended to cut his children out of his will entirely. Maybe he just wanted to make a statement, spark a conversation, teach a lesson, and remind his children and the world that family isn't about money. It's about love, connection, shared experiences, and values. The fact that this announcement made his family cry might have been exactly the reaction he was hoping for, because those tears represented something real and raw and honest. They cut through the bullshit and the wealth and the fame and got to something essential about human relationships. Think about it from Mick Jagger's perspective. He's 81 years old. He's lived an extraordinary life. He's performed for millions of people. He's created music that will outlive him by centuries. He's had relationships with some of the most beautiful and talented women in the world. He's raised 8 children, each unique and each carrying part of his legacy forward. He's been knighted by the Queen of England. He's traveled the world dozens of times over. He's experienced wealth beyond imagination. What's left? What does someone like Mick Jagger have left to prove or accomplish? Perhaps the answer is, teach his children one last crucial lesson about what really matters. In wealthy families, there's often an unspoken dynamic where children are waiting, sometimes unconsciously, for their parents to die so they can inherit. It's macabre, but it's real. Money creates these perverse incentives. By publicly stating that the money might not be coming, Jagger eliminates that dynamic. His children can love him for who he is, not for what they'll get from him. They can spend time with him motivated by genuine connection rather than financial strategy. They can have authentic relationships with him and with each other without money poisoning the dynamics. That's a gift that's potentially worth more than any amount in a bank account. The announcement also protects Jagger's final years. There will be no arguments about the will while he's still alive. There will be no children trying to influence his decisions about money. There will be no lawyers circling, no families positioning for advantage. He's taken the power back and maintained it for himself. As long as the question of the inheritance remains open, he remains firmly in control of his estate and his family dynamics. And here's something else to consider. Mick Jagger watched what happened with other rock stars and their estates. He saw the fights over Elvis Presley's estate. He saw the legal battles over Michael Jackson's assets. He saw how families can be torn apart by inheritance disputes. He's watched marriages end and families fracture over money. He's seen enough wealth-related drama to last several lifetimes. By handling this publicly and proactively, while he's still alive and mentally sharp, he's potentially preventing that kind of ugliness from happening to his own family after he's gone. There's also the matter of Mick Jagger's own mortality. At 81, even in excellent health for his age, he's in the final chapter of his life. He knows this. His children know this. The world knows this. Every tour could be his last. Every album could be the final one. In this context, questions about legacy become urgent and meaningful. What does he want to be remembered for? Just being a great rock star? Or for being someone who uses success and wealth to make a genuine positive difference in the world? The charitable giving option allows him to reshape his legacy in his final years, to be known not just as Mick Jagger the rock star, but as Mick Jagger the philanthropist. Let's also talk about the tax implications, because they're significant and they probably played a role in Jagger's thinking. In the United Kingdom, where Jagger holds citizenship and a title, estate taxes can be substantial, up to 40% of the value of an estate over a certain threshold. In the United States, where he owns property and has citizenship considerations through his children, estate taxes can be similarly high. If Jagger simply left his entire fortune to his children, a huge chunk of it, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, would go to various governments in taxes. However, charitable donations are typically tax-deductible and can significantly reduce estate tax burdens. By directing substantial portions of his estate to charity, Jagger could ensure that more of his actual wealth goes to causes he cares about rather than to tax authorities. It's not just about philosophy. It's also about financial strategy. The complexity of Jagger's international assets adds another layer to this. He owns property in multiple countries. He has income streams from various jurisdictions. His touring revenue comes from around the world. Managing an estate like this requires sophisticated legal and financial planning, and the decisions about how to distribute it aren't simple. Different countries have different inheritance laws, different tax treaties, different regulations about charitable giving. The announcement that he might give most of his money to charity simplifies some of these complications, at least conceptually. Now, let's talk about what's probably going through each of his children's minds. Karis, the oldest at 53, has had the longest relationship with wealth and with her father's fame. She's also experienced rejection and reconciliation. Her tears, if she shed any, were probably complex, a mixture of understanding her father's position, perhaps some disappointment at the lost financial security, but also pride in having a father who thinks beyond just accumulating and passing down wealth. She's old enough and experienced enough to understand the value of work, of earning your own way, and of not being defined by inherited wealth. Jade, at 54 and with her own successful business, probably reacted similarly. She's been independent for decades. She has her own money, her own career, her own identity. The inheritance would have been nice, certainly, but it's not essential to her life or happiness. Her tears might have been more about what the announcement said about family dynamics and her father's values than about the actual money. Elizabeth, James, and Georgia, all in their 30s and 40s, and all with successful careers in modeling, acting, or design, represent the middle cohort. They're established but still building. They have earning potential ahead of them. For them, the inheritance question is probably about security and opportunity. Will they be able to provide for their own children the way their father provided for them? The tears here might have been about confronting the reality that they'll need to be more financially careful and strategic than they might have been if hundreds of millions were coming their way. Gabriel, Lucas, and Deveraux, the younger children, face different challenges. Gabriel and Lucas are in their 20s and still establishing themselves. Deveraux is only 8. For them, the lack of a massive inheritance means they'll need to truly build their own careers and identities, which would ultimately be a gift even if it doesn't feel like one right now. The tears from this group, or from their mothers on their behalf, might have been the most acute, a sense of opportunity lost before it was ever really had. But here's the beautiful and ironic thing about all of this. By announcing that his children won't inherit most of his fortune, Mick Jagger has actually made them more interesting, more sympathetic, and potentially more successful. They're no longer those rich kids waiting for their trust funds. They're Mick Jagger's kids who have to make it on their own. That's a much better narrative. That's a much more compelling story. And in our modern media landscape, where personal brand and narrative matter enormously, Jagger has actually given his children a gift of a better story. The attention this announcement has received has also raised the profile of all 8 children. People who didn't know Georgia May Jagger was a successful model now know. People who hadn't heard of James Jagger's acting career are now looking him up. The publicity around this decision has, ironically, probably created more professional opportunities for the Jagger children than they would have had otherwise. Designers, directors, brands, and companies are more interested in people with interesting stories and values-driven narratives. And Mick Jagger's kid, who doesn't need daddy's money, is exactly that kind of story. There's also a feminist angle to consider here. 3 of Jagger's most successful children, Jade, Elizabeth, and Georgia, are women who've built careers in fields that capitalize on beauty, creativity, and business acumen. By not simply handing them a fortune, Jagger is essentially saying that they're capable of succeeding on their own merits, which is actually a powerful statement of respect and confidence. He's not treating them as delicate flowers who need to be financially protected forever. He's treating them as competent adults who can make their way in the world. That's a compliment wrapped in a financial decision. Let's also acknowledge that not everyone agrees with Jagger's approach. Some people think it's cruel to deny your children financial security when you have the means to provide it. Some argue that it's selfish to give your money to abstract charitable causes rather than to the flesh and blood people you created and raised. Some believe that family comes first, always, and that taking care of your descendants is a fundamental human responsibility. These are valid perspectives, and there's no objectively right answer to the question of what we owe our children financially. Cultural factors play a role too. In many Asian cultures, family wealth is expected to pass down through generations, and not providing for your children would be seen as a failure of duty. In some European aristocratic traditions, estates and titles pass to the oldest son, with younger children receiving smaller inheritances or nothing at all. In America, there's a complicated relationship with inherited wealth. We celebrate self-made success stories while simultaneously maintaining dynasties like the Kennedys, the Rockefellers, and the Waltons. Mick Jagger, as a British knight who made his fortune primarily in America and has lived around the world, embodies all of these contradictions. The Rolling Stones themselves represent an interesting case study in how to handle wealth and legacy. Keith Richards, Jagger's longtime partner and the other main songwriter in the band, has his own fortune of around $500 million. He has 5 children with multiple women. Similar to Jagger's situation, Richards hasn't made the same public statements about inheritance that Jagger has, so it's unclear whether he shares Jagger's philosophy or plans to distribute his wealth differently. Charlie Watts, the Stones drummer who passed away in 2021, was known for living relatively modestly despite his wealth and left his estate primarily to his wife and daughter. Ron Wood, the Stones guitarist, has 6 children and a more complicated financial situation involving divorce settlements and other factors. Each Stone has handled their wealth differently, reflecting different values and family situations. What makes Jagger's announcement particularly powerful is that it comes from someone who truly has lived the rock and roll lifestyle to its fullest extent. This isn't someone who accumulated wealth through conservative business practices and careful living. This is someone who lived the excess, the parties, the drugs, the relationships, the chaos of rock and roll at its peak, and somehow survived it all to become a wise elder statesman of rock. There's a redemptive quality to that arc, a sense that despite all the indulgence and excess, Jagger ultimately developed wisdom and values that transcend wealth accumulation. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The real reason his family cried. They were confronting the reality that their father, who has given them so much, life, opportunity, access, a famous name, connections, experiences, might not give them the one thing that our culture has taught us to value above almost everything else: inherited wealth. And that confrontation forced them to ask themselves, what do we really need? What do we really value? Are we capable and accomplished enough to make our own way? Do we love our Father for who He is or for what He has? These are hard questions, the kind that bring tears, but they're also essential questions for living meaningful lives. Mick Jagger has given his children one final lesson, perhaps the most important one: that wealth is not the measure of worth. That success must be earned, not inherited. That family is about more than money. That legacy is about what you give to the world, not just what you leave to your descendants. These are old-fashioned values, actually the kind of working-class British values that Jagger himself grew up with. His father was a teacher. His mother was a hairdresser. He grew up in a modest middle-class household where money was earned through work, where opportunities had to be created rather than inherited. In a sense, by potentially denying his children automatic wealth, he's giving them the same gift his parents gave him: the necessity and the opportunity to make something of themselves on their own terms. The tears that flowed when Mick Jagger's family learned about his plans weren't just about disappointment or loss. They were about recognition. Recognition that their father, at 81, is still teaching them. Recognition that the end of his life is approaching, and that these questions about money and legacy are really about love and meaning. Recognition that they've been given so much already: opportunities, experiences, a name that opens doors, and that expecting even more might be greedy. Recognition that their father's values include generosity and social responsibility beyond just family. And recognition that they're capable of succeeding without a massive safety net, which is both terrifying and empowering. In the end, Mick Jagger's fortune, whether it ends up being $500 million, $600 million, or even more, is just money. It's just paper and digital numbers and property deeds and legal documents. What will outlast all of it is the music, Satisfaction will still be played 100 years from now. Paint It Black will still give people chills. Gimme Shelter will still capture something essential about human vulnerability and strength. The Rolling Stones catalog is the real inheritance, not to Jagger's children specifically, but to the world. It's a gift to humanity, a soundtrack to the second half of the 20th century and beyond. And no amount of money, no matter how it's distributed, can compare to that legacy. So when the tears flow in the Jagger household, they're tears of complexity. They're tears of confronting mortality and meaning. They're tears of realizing that the larger-than-life figure who is your father is actually making plans for a world in which he doesn't exist. They're tears of recognizing that you've been privileged beyond measure, and that with that privilege comes responsibility. They're tears of understanding that the most valuable things your parents can give you aren't material at all. They're values, strength, resilience, creativity, and love. And maybe, just maybe, they're tears of gratitude that they had a father who thought deeply about these questions and had the courage to make a decision that reflects his values, even if it's not the decision they might have hoped for. Mick Jagger will die someday. It's the one certainty in all of this. When he does, the will be read, the estate will be distributed, and we'll all learn exactly what he decided to do with his fortune. Until then, the announcement serves its purpose. It forces conversation, it clarifies values, it strengthens family bonds through honest confrontation, and it reminds everyone, his children, his fans, and the world at large, that there are things more important than money. For a man who spent his youth singing about satisfaction, and his middle age building an empire of wealth, that might be the most rock and roll statement of all.